Okay, let's begin. So the topic of tonight's discussion is the idea of chaos and creativity and spiritual progress. This is actually in response to a question that someone sent me by email, which anyone is welcome to do. I can't guarantee that I'll make a class out of it, but this was an interesting idea that I felt needed to be addressed. The person asked me, I'm not going to say names, of course, but the person asked me, they find that the greatest moments of creativity is at times when they bring themselves into a state of chaos. Now, this particular person did that with, from what I understand, using drugs of various sorts, which I do not in any way recommend. And in fact, the opposite is true. But let's just leave that aside. Let's leave aside the means of how it's achieved and just discuss the concept of creativity out of chaos. Now, in Kabbalah, the concept of chaos is called the world of Tohu. This is actually spoken about right in the beginning of Genesis, when it says, "V'ha'aretz hayata tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei hatohom." The earth was chaotic and void. In other words, void of the divine presence, in a revealed way at least. The earth was void, was chaotic and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. In other words, above the waters and above the deepest waters, the water is always representative of divine influence, or the way we say it today, the waters of Torah, of teaching, of divine teachings. There was darkness on the divine teachings. In other words, there's no possibility of seeing any light. There was no light visible or available. And then, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, God said there shall be light. Usually translated as let there be light, but let is sort of the wrong kind of word to use. Who's going to let there be light? There shall be light, right? Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, God said there shall be light, and there was light. That is expressed in Kabbalah as the world of Tikkun, the world of Tikkun. So we have two states, the state of Tohu and the state of Tikkun. The world we live in now is post-Tohu, although there are echoes of the world of Tohu right throughout creation. But the world we live in primarily is the world of Tikkun, the world of rectification. Now, what does Tikkun also mean? Tikkun is in Aramaic, which is a very close language to Hebrew. The word Tikkun is usually the translation of the word, of one of the words for clothing, like begadim or levushim. Levushim, levushe isha, the garments of a woman, is translated as tikkune itasa, the garments, tikkune, the tikkunim. So the concept of tikkun is associated with garments or clothing, or as we'll explain later on, that clothing, garments, etc., are just a type of levush, a type of kli. They are a type of vessel. In other words, a container of some sort or another. What does clothing do? At the same time that clothing conceals what's underneath the clothing, at the same time it gives what's underneath the clothing, gives it a certain shape. So you can guess from the shape, more or less, what's underneath the garment. Although not perfectly, obviously, but nevertheless, the objective, it's explained in Kabbalah, is to get to the light that is within the vessel. In other words, the vessels themselves are not the ultimate purpose, but without the vessels, there would be no light. We need the vessels to hold the light. We need the kelim to hold the or in the language of Kabbalah. So without vessels, there wouldn't be a possibility of being light. For example, let's just give an analogy. If you light a candle, the wick of the candle and the oil or the wax of the candle is called the vessel, so to speak, that holds down the flame. Because if you, as soon as the wick or the fuel for the flame, the oil or the wax burns out, so automatically the flame will go out. There'll be nothing left. There will be no light. So we need something here down below in order to hold that light. That's called a vessel, or in our language that we just expressed, that's the garment. Now, without the garments, everything is dark. So the state of tohu, the state of chaos, was a state where there's a tremendous amount of light, but no vessels, or the vessels were not able to contain the light, actually, and they shattered. That's what causes the chaos. The chaotic state of the world of tohu is because the vessels were, so to speak, immature vessels, and they weren't able to contain the light. So, in order for the light to be contained, there had to be vessels and multiple vessels that would contain the light. Not just one or two, but because there was so much light, there had to be many, many, many vessels. And that's the world of tikkun, the world of rectification. There's only one problem with the world of rectification, with the world of tikkun, and that problem is that at the same time that the vessel holds the light, it to a certain extent conceals it. It covers over, it cloaks the light, if you want to use that analogy from the analogy of clothing. It cloaks the light and you can't see it clearly unless one does a certain amount of work. So, to go back to the original question, inducing states of chaos in order to reveal the light, it's true that when there's a state of chaos and the vessels break apart, so the light is now free of the vessels, right? It's not limited in those particular vessels. It can go now into any vessel, but if there aren't any, if there are no vessels, then the light just simply doesn't shine anymore. It disappears, so to speak. That's the problem with the world of tohu. The world of tohu has an advantage over the world of tikkun. Tremendous amount of light. Problem is, there's nothing to reveal the light. There's no vessels. Tikkun has an advantage in that the light is contained. The disadvantage of the world of tikkun is that the light is obscured to a certain extent by the vessels, unless one makes the vessels transparent, so to speak, right? Unless one makes the vessels transparent. Now that is part of the entire process of the self-refinement, which is an integral part of Kabbalistic endeavor. It's not just all up here in the mind. It has to be in the heart, in behavior, in every aspect of a person. Has to be the proper garment or the proper vessel to contain light. And it has to be become more and more refined in order to reveal the light. So, let's just take a step back and consider this concept of chaos and the alternatives to chaos. Again, chaos is a good thing in a certain sense. It has an advantage in a certain sense. And that is that when there's a state of chaos, the vessels don't obscure the light. Again, the problem is that they don't contain the light either. The light is not contained and there's nowhere for it to go. So eventually the light is not there. It's darkness. So, the obvious thing to do, therefore, is to combine both of these states, which is essentially what the world of tikkun is all about. The world of tikkun comes to rectify the world of tohu, to once more elicit those lights, that same revelation, that same amount of light that illuminated tohu, but in a way that it can be contained, in a way that it's useful, in a way that it illuminates. So, getting rid of the vessels is obviously not the way to go. Getting rid of the vessels is not the way to go because that would cause the light to sort of disappear, as we said before. So what is the correct solution then? What is it that can be done? So in order to explain this is actually an analogy which is brought in Hasidic literature. And again, Hasidism is a branch of Kabbalah. It's the branch and the method of Kabbalah that was initiated by and taught initially by the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, and then his disciples following all the way through to our generations. So the analogy that they bring is of planting a seed in the earth. When you plant a seed, so what happens? In order for the seed to germinate, so it has to lose its form, so to speak. Something has to happen. The seed itself disintegrates, at least to a certain extent, and possibly more than a certain extent, maybe almost completely, before it starts to sprout. Now, I know if anyone's done experiments with putting beans in cotton wool and things like that, that doesn't really happen like that. But in real life situations in the world, when you plant seeds in the earth, if you go and look afterwards and see if there's any seed there underneath the plant, there's no seed. The seed has completely disappeared. So in order for the seed to grow into a plant, in order for the plant to grow, the seed must disintegrate. The seed must no longer be there. That is called, in this Hasidic terminology, that's called the concept of bitul. Now, bitul has two meanings. Bitul means nullification in a negative sense. In other words, like you would say, bitul hakelim could mean that the vessels break apart back to the world of tohu, releasing the light, and there's tremendous amount of light, but nothing to contain it. So therefore, because the light is not revealed, it's already darkness. That's one form of bittul. The other form of bittul is the bittul of the vessels themselves. Not that the vessels become nullified, but that the nullification is felt in the vessel. In other words, the vessel remains as it is, but it feels that it has a greater task. It has a, how shall we say, it has a mission in life. And that mission in life is to become like the light that it contains. The more like the light it becomes, the more of the light it will reveal. And that is the whole idea of bittul in the world of tikkun. In the world of tikkun, bittul is not to get rid of the vessels. In other words, as I've said many, many, many times, the way that the sages express this is basically that the intention is not to go up into your cave and meditate for the rest of your life. There's by divine providence, today was the day of Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, the passing of the author of the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Traditionally, that's who we accept as the author of the Zohar, despite what some academics who really haven't proven the case at all have to say. And I have many articles on this concept. If you want to go have a look at Chabad.org or KabbalahOnline.org, just search for my name and look for authenticity of the Zohar articles. You'll see a lot of articles over there about this concept. You spell bittul the right way, Wendy. That's it, bittul. If you want to spell it in Hebrew, it's Bet Yud Taf Vav Lamed. Yeah, I'll spell it in Hebrew for you. I don't know if that's what you want, but yeah. Bittul. Otherwise, you spelled it right. Yeah. Okay. So today was the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that is a day on which it's a day of tremendous. It's a celebration. It's called a hilula. A hilula means a party, or actually a wedding, right? It's the wedding of the soul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai with the Almighty, with God. His soul ascended to the very, very highest levels, and when he passed away, and he commanded, he requested, before he passed away, that they should not observe this day as a day of mourning, which is often the case, that when a saintly person passes away, it becomes a day of mourning. He requested specifically that it would not be a day of mourning, but there will be a day of celebration. What's called in the terminology in the Zohar, hilula. right? The Hilula, the wedding of the soul when it returns to its maker. So one of the stories that's told about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon made a very disparaging remark. This was at a time when the Romans had conquered the Middle East, and they were building all kinds of amphitheaters and bathhouses and and so on and so forth in Israel and Jerusalem and various other places throughout Israel, Caesarea, which is named after Caesar, and various places in Israel. And some of the sages were discussing this. One of the people, one of the acquaintances, someone named Yehuda ben Gerim, was a person who was actually a convert to Judaism. And he apparently wasn't very, it seems like he was a recent convert, and he wasn't very knowledgeable or careful about the way he spoke about things, and he criticized the Romans in public. I'm sorry, not he criticized the Romans in public, he praised the Romans in public. Now, given that they'd butchered so many people, it was kind of an odd thing to do. They'd butchered half of the Jewish community in Jerusalem and throughout Israel. And here he's praising them. What was he praising them for? For the wonderful public works which they had built, amphitheaters for entertainment, pretty brutal entertainment, I might add, but and bathhouses and so on and so forth. And there was another sage with him, Rabbi Yossi, who kept quiet. He didn't respond to this. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, and he responded and said, they are only building these things for their own pleasure and for zima, for essentially lewdness and prostitution in the bathhouses and so on. And there's nothing good about what they're doing at all. The Roman authorities got to hear of this, and they came to arrest Rabbi Shimon. He knew that they were coming. There was no informant, but he was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so he knew. And he disappeared. And they kept on looking for him, pursuing him, and eventually he made the decision that together with his son, they would escape to a cave, which they did. And they hid out in this cave until the Roman emperor died. And then they ventured out. They were in that cave for 12 years, right? They lived in the cave, very, very little food, no clothing other than what they were wearing, but they buried themselves in sand, and they spent the entire time delving into the deepest secrets of the Torah, and that is where the bulk of the Zohar was actually put together, whether it was written there or was just clarified to each other. Rabbi Shimon started teaching his son these deeper secrets of the Torah. In any event, they came out of the cave at the end of 12 years, and they looked around and they saw people sort of tilling their fields and planting their vineyards and so on and so forth, and herding their flocks. And they were just completely astonished. They were, in fact, disgusted that this is what people are doing with their time. They're wasting their time on such trivial pursuits as making a living. And wherever they looked, this is the story is told in the Talmud, tractate Shabbos. In any event, wherever they looked, the fields caught alight from their anger, so to speak, and I'll explain this a little bit more in a minute. They were so disappointed with what they saw that their disappointment, so to speak, ignited all of the orchards and vineyards and fields that they saw. And a voice came out of heaven and said, "Is this what you're doing to my world? Go back to your cave." They went back to the cave for another year, and when they came out, Rabbi Shimon had completely rectified that idea, that it's possible to live in the mundane world and nevertheless reveal godliness in the world. And then they were allowed to remain. They were allowed to remain in the world, and they did not have to go back to the cave. The point being that the idea is to live in the world and yet make the world a better place, reveal the godliness within the world. Not divorce yourself from the world and go off into a cave, into a ashram, into the top of a mountain or whatever it is, and meditate and delve into godliness there on your own. Yes, it's true. There's a certain period of time that one should probably do that. It's a good thing to do. But that's not the proper way of life in a general sense. As you know, the first commandment, the first mitzvah, the first commandment in the Bible is the commandment of be fruitful and multiply, right? To have a family, to be fruitful, to multiply, to bring more people into the world, bring more souls into the world, to have a family life. We're not isolationists here. We're not individualists in the sense that nothing else. On the contrary, to bring two things together, two disparate things, husband and wife, even though they may be part of the same soul root, nevertheless have different upbringings, different perspectives in certain sense, and therefore there may be some friction between them. It's very rare that you find a couple where there's no friction ever at any time. So there may be friction, but the whole point is to be able to make a harmony where that friction exists, to make harmony out of friction, to make harmony out of maybe a pair that doesn't match 100%. And that's an analogy for all of life. So the idea therefore, is that creativity should not come out of the chaos in and of itself, but how we work with the chaos. In other words, inducing chaos. There's enough chaos in the world without having to induce any more, right? Really, there is. There's plenty of chaos. What we need to do is exactly the opposite. We need to introduce order. And introducing order means having vessels. And having vessels means living in the world and living in the world in a proper way. Living in the world in a way that makes the world a better place. And that is, in fact, the concept of spiritual progress. During these days, today is the 33rd day of the Omer, or as it's called, Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. What's the counting of the Omer? On the second day of Passover, we count the days, right? There's 50 days. We only count 49, but from the second day of Passover until the holiday when the Torah was given to the Jewish people, right? They were in the desert, and at a certain point in time, they started counting. That was Passover, the day after Passover. Passover was in Egypt. Then they were out of Egypt. From then, they started counting. From that second day, 49 days, and the 50th day was when we received the Torah. So the 49 days of counting is called Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. The Omer was a certain sacrifice, that offering, a barley offering that was brought on the altar. But the idea of Sfira, as it's called in brief, Sfira counting, is that you count the 7 Sfirot of the emotional qualities, the emotional Sfirot. I didn't get just one second, let me get a chart up here. Here we go. I think this is a good one. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so the counting of the Omer only counts these Sfirot over here, right? Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. These six Sfirot, but each of them is comprised of all of the others. In other words, there's an amalgamation that happens. So the first day they count Chesed of Chesed, right? Kindness within kindness. Then they count Gvura within kindness. Gvura means withdrawal, or could be awe, severity, various other explanations of it. If you have my Sphira chart, you should know what those are. So then it goes Gvura Chesed. That's all the first week, right? The first week is the week of Chesed. The second week, the week of Gvura. The third week, the week of Tiferet. So it goes Chesed Shebechesed, Gvura Shebechesed, Tiferet in Chesed, Netzach of Chesed, Hodat, Yesod, Malchut of Chesed. And then you start the next week, Gvura. Chesed shebegvura, Gvura shebegvura, Tiferet shebegvura, etc. So the day of Rabbi Shimon's passing is Hod Shebehod. Hod Shebehod. What does Hod mean? Hod mean, the word Hod in Hebrew could mean glory. It also means Hoda'at. From the word Hoda'ah means acknowledgement. Acknowledgement means, how shall I say it? Succumbing is the wrong word, but it's kind of on the right track. It means giving things up for the sake of acknowledging that somebody else is making the decisions here, in other words, God, is the concept of Hoda'ah. It's acknowledging that my soul is in your hands. As we say every night, yes, tonight we counted Yesod of Hod, yes. Today was Hod Shebehod, right? So it means acknowledging within acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we have to acknowledge that we are not in control, right? B'yadchav kidruchi. In your hands I put my soul when I go to sleep at night. The truth is, when I wake up in the morning also, same thing, right? Putting your soul in God's hands is the concept of Hod Shebehod. So, that is the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But as you can see, there's a very clear structure. There's a very, very clear structure. There's a spiritual progress that this follows. We start off with this, and we move to that, and move to that, and move to that, etc., until we get to the end, Malchut Sheba Malchut, and then the day after that, we receive the Torah. We receive the divine law, the divine revelation, essentially. That's what we receive afterwards. But there's an orderliness to it. There's a seder, as it's the word is in Hebrew. There's a mode of progression. In other words, you can't really get to real creative content unless there's a structure. It's true that there's certain geniuses. Van Gogh was an incredible artistic genius, but unfortunately, when he started going crazy, he had schizophrenia apparently or something like that. When he started getting crazy, his paintings started getting crazy as well. They were still creative, but they were crazy creative. So very, very disturbing paintings. When he he cut off his own ear, and all kinds of very strange things happened with him, and so on. So therefore, real creativity, which comes as a flash from above, essentially, requires vessels to be built in order to contain it. That can't be done unless there was a proper, orderly arrangement of things prior to that. Okay. Okay, let's just see here. There's a few questions. I'm going to go back a little bit earlier. Okay, from Ernest. We work on the worker's description. What are we describing with the word work? I.e., the doubts that we were transforming into faith and Munah, spending some time on Torah mitzvot, recognizing God through everything. The application of faith and Munah. What is work? Yes, that's work. That is work. Indeed, that is work. That's exactly the kind of work. That's spiritual work. Yeah, there's physical work and there's spiritual work. But part of the building of vessels is spiritual work, which is a mistake that a lot of people make. They think that, no, well, spiritual work is only when you're praying or only when you're, meditating. Not necessarily true. Living as a good human being in the world is part of the spiritual work that we need to do, that we have to do, in order to fulfill our mission in life, individually and collectively. All right, so next question. How can we know what our mission is in life, and how can we share our light with everyone else to the glorification of Hashem? Very good question. How does a person know what their mission is in life? Usually, you have several clues. First of all, one of the clues which you're given, which you had no choice in, is the name you were given. The name you were given at birth by your parents, we assume, is very often a clue as to where that person is, what that person's mission is in life. Well, how do you know? So that's not so simple. You have to do an analysis, and if anyone wants to know about it, I could tell them a little bit more. But this is something that is very useful for some people anyway. For some people, it's very useful to know what people who are not aware of necessarily what their function is, what their purpose is, why they're here. That's one approach to do a name analysis, which I do privately, by the way. Another way of doing that, of knowing what your mission is to examine yourself, self-examination, to see what your talents really are. Now, we all have many talents that we never use, I'm sure. Buried talents, hidden talents, and so on. But the revealed talents which we know about, this person's an artist, that person's a singer, another person is just a good organizer, another person's a cook. Another person's like, just excellent green fingers, as they say, excellent with gardening and things like that, and flowers and plants and so on. Everyone has their things that they excel at. Now, it could be that there's someone that's better than you. It doesn't matter, right? If that's an area that you excel, then that can be used and was given to you as a gift to use for building a better world, for divine purposes, for fulfilling your mission. Your soul came down in order to do those things using those vessels that you were given. That could be anything. A person could be a photographer, right? Whatever, an auto mechanic, and be able to use that in a positive way. Now, does that mean that you have to do something for free only? Be an auto mechanic for free? You'll never make a living. What are you going to eat, right? Where are you going to live? No, just means the way you treat people and the way you do things, what you do with the product of your work. In other words, you do a good, give something to charity, help out people who perhaps, the little old lady down the street who can't walk to the store and her car is not running well. Here and there you can do a charitable act and help out, help to maintain an ambulance in your community, or a fire truck, something, anything. All right. Those are the kinds of things that we can. So that's the second way of knowing what your mission is in life. A third way of knowing what your mission is in life is to go to a tzaddik, a saintly person, who could reveal it to you. Now, the last way of doing it, even though it can be extremely powerful and very, very enlightening, is not necessarily the preferred way. The preferred way is for you to seek it yourself. Figure it out. Why? Because then it's more valuable to you. When someone else tells you it's good, but you didn't do the work, and therefore you probably didn't uncover all the talents that you could possibly uncover. But when one does the work, a lot of introspection and thinking and so on and so forth, what is it that I love to do? What is it that I would love to do? If I had the time to do it, I could, etc., etc. Those kinds of things are a very good clue as to where you're holding. You know what? I forgot to share. Oh, I didn't forget to share. I did share it. Okay, fine. All right. All right. So, let's see here. Okay. Let's see. There's another question here. Explain the nature of our vessel. It's personal attachment, identity, sexuality. I want to believe, and I'm honest. I can. If I'm honest, I cannot. I'm not successful. My time here is passing. Terry, I think there's a bigger question than can be answered in a forum like this. I think that as a person who is involved with helping other people to try and fix up their lives, I think you have a very important role to play in that area, and I think that's where you should focus. Identity, sexuality are things that are not essential to our beings. In other words, they don't define who we are. Those are not, the fact that I'm a white Jewish male or whatever it is of a certain age is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Okay. Yeah, you have to be watchful, you have to be humble, and you have to ask the Almighty for some help. As King David would say, Et panecha Hashem avakesh. I am seeking you out. I'm looking for your countenance. If you look for the godliness in things, then you start to find like what it is that you're good at. And where are you good at revealing godliness? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Okay. Well, thank you. Good. Excellent. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so we'll leave it at that. And I think next week we will have a class. The week after, I don't think we will, but probably next week we will have a class. I'll let you know. All right, folks, have a good one.